kind of long-winded way of saying that respect other people's culture, but again, be in tune with yours. But you got to be in tune with your culture, not what other people tell you it should be. You have, I think that's when we'll go into this discussion about manhood and fatherhood. That's the internal struggle. You have external forces saying that you should be this way, but you have your own values, your own internal beliefs that you should operate in a certain way. I think that's where some of that tension comes in.
It's interesting as you say that, because I mean, when you think about, again, like the way that I view my life is, I have like some non-negotiable. What's happening, y'all? This is Mike D with Black Fathers Now, where we're bringing the village to the brothers. Every couple of weeks, you can look forward to a quick inspirational message or a thought-provoking guest with knowledge and wisdom, all geared towards helping you be the best father that you can be. We're bringing the village to you. Now it's your turn to do something with what you learned. All right, y'all. Let's go. What's going on, fellas? This is Mike D, Mr. Double Down on You, with another episode of Black Fathers Now. Now, as I always say, because I don't bring on nothing but some doggone hitters, I got a hitter today. I got my man, Dr. Nick Mmbaga. Now, Nick is a husband. He's a father. He's a business professor at Butler University. And he and his wife actually went to Butler University as a unit. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But he comes from an entrepreneurial family. He comes from a family of Tanzanian descent. But he also, growing up, spent a little bit of time in Syria, which I think will be kind of interesting because, you hear Syria in the news. We hear about it, but very rarely do we have a brother who's had firsthand experience actually living there. So we're going to hear about all of this, the twists and turns, what led him to what he's doing now, and all of that. But fellas, ladies listening to, let's welcome my man, my friend, Dr. Nick Mmbaga. What's up, brother?
How you doing, Mike? I appreciate you inviting me out here, and I look forward to kind of telling you my story and discussing about fatherhood and marriage and children and all those things that encompass my life. So I'll just kind of give you a little bit of background about myself, currently where I'm at, and then I'll kind of explain how I got here.
Okay. So well, hold on. Pause. Before we jump into your story, we always got to give shout outs. Okay. See, that's the whole thing, with the platform here. We got to make sure we celebrate those that are allowing us to be who we are on a daily basis, or those that have inspired us along the way. They say in the movies, all the important people get mentioned before the movie starts, right? So let's go ahead and drop a dime on the important people. Then let's jump into your story, brother.
All right. So the important people, of course, spiritually, I start off with God, because those blessings, without those blessings, I wouldn't be here. My wife, my children, my mother, my brother and sister, and essentially my family unit. I'll tell you a little bit of background once we get there about Tanzania. But my grandfather and grandmother, my Babu and Bibi, laid the foundations for who I am today. So I want to give a shout out to them. Family first. Awesome. Now, and that's amazing. And it's interesting having, we're all rooted from the African perspective, but you have more of a direct connection to Africa, having direct lineage to Tanzania, and mentioning the whole concept of family first. I think we'll dive into it a little bit more, how that really, is kind of the root to who you are, the foundation to who you are going forward. So I appreciate you giving that. So now let's jump into your story, man. Tell us a little bit about what you got going on. Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start where I'm at presently and then kind of trace my way backwards. So I'm currently an assistant professor of entrepreneurship at Butler University. And what that means is I do half my time I spend doing research on entrepreneurs, and then half my time I spend teaching students about entrepreneurship, the process, what it entails, and the practical elements of it. Prior to being an assistant professor of entrepreneurship, I'm an entrepreneur myself. I co-founded our family healthcare company, which is located in Middle Tennessee. Grew it from nothing, from a really small organization to multi-million-dollar organization with over 100 employees. So that was my real experience. I guess I would say my first job entry was our home healthcare business. And Butler
currently at Butler University. This is my first quote unquote real job that I'm working. And so right now I operate as a hybrid. So I'm chairman of the board of our family business as well as an assistant professor. But if we trace back and we talk about lineage, I come from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And if you don't know where that is, it's on the borderline between Kenya, Uganda, and then Mozambique below us. And my family comes from Usangi, so it's in the mountains. And you can actually see Mount Kilimanjaro from my grandmother, which I refer to as Bibi, Swahili term for grandmother. You can see Mount Kilimanjaro from her house. And so that's where our roots start. And I was raised by my mother, Dr. Nick Mmbaga. She's a plant pathologist. And I wasn't raised around my father, but a lot of respect. He's passed now, Dr. Alfeo Nick Mmbaga. I didn't know him growing up. So a big part of my story about fatherhood, being a husband, and just being a man revolves around that void of not having a father. But I go back to the roots of Tanzania because that's really who I am. In the Tanzanian culture, it's really focused on family first. Everything's about the community. One, because of just resources, limited resources, you need those communal aspects just to survive. But two, it's just a way of culture. And I take those values with me throughout. So I lived in Tanzania until I was about 3. And then after I lived in Tanzania, we moved to the States. I lived in New York, lived in Nebraska for a little while. And, I had a normal childhood. We low income, single mom. She didn't make much, but we relied on each other. I had my brother, my older brother, my older sister. So I'm the youngest of the group. And we just relied on each other. And we moved around. We ended up moving to Aleppo, Syria when I was around 7. And Aleppo and Syria was, I think, a life-changing moment for me. I just traveled to New Orleans a few days ago, and I was talking to a gentleman who was from Palestine. And we had a conversation about Islam and Christianity. And I think one of the perspectives that I took from living in Syria was that, look, I lived around a population where, 99% were Muslims and practiced Islam faithfully. And you couldn't openly practice Christianity. And I'm a Christian and, I was raised Christian. My grandfather was actually a Muslim who converted to Christianity. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping around the story.
No, this is good. This is cool.
These are the family dynamics. So I have family still to this day that are Muslim, and I have family that are Christian. But this kind of gets into this point. So I'm in Syria, in a place where you can't openly practice Christianity, and Christianity is just not really recognized. I'm not going to say it's condemned, but it was illegal to practice it openly. And what I took from that was a lot of people from Syria that practice Islam just in this particular place never interacted with Christians. I see those same parallels in the United States, where you have a lot of folks who never really interacted with individuals who practice in groups that practice Islam. And both Islam and Christianity are beautiful faiths and religions. And you have good Christians and you have bad Christians. You have good Muslims and bad Muslims. And I never understood how there was this kind of this conflict that always existed when these groups really didn't interact and know each other well. And I've interacted with both groups. And I have no bias towards Muslims. I have no bias towards Christians. And I've had negative interactions with Muslims. And I've had negative interactions with Christians. So I think that's one of the things that stuck with me from Syria, from like a value standpoint and a kind of a theoretical standpoint. Another standpoint was just the way of life. I went to an international school, so you basically had to be a very wealthy Syrian to go here, or your parents were expatriates living there and that worked for a research center, because my mom worked for a research center. So one of my classmates actually had a gold factory, like they manufactured gold.
What?
I'm serious. That's how rich these Syrians were. I had my brother, not mine, but my brother's classmate had his own jean line. You know how like Calvin Klein on everyone's jeans? He had his own jean line that everyone wore. and it was his name.
Wow.
So it was like these dynamics of these really wealthy Syrians, and then, the rest of, similar to many developing countries, you have very rich, it's really dichotomous. You have very well-to-do and economically advantaged, and then you have those who are disadvantaged. There's no really middle class. And so I think about those aspects of life, and it's, going to the Citadel, experiencing just a whole different country, a whole different culture. It's allowed me to be flexible and adapt. And so that kind of moves me forward. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was going to say, it's so interesting. The experience on the poles, or the experience in the extreme, so to speak, give you the ability to navigate and adapt no matter the circumstance or the situation or the environment. And I think, to your point, it goes back to what you mentioned before, the lack of tolerance or the lack of connectivity between individuals is because we've not stepped outside of our box to interact with somebody on the other side of the coin, politically, religiously, from the standpoint of gender, from the standpoint of race, from sexual orientation, whatever. We have our thoughts. And it's interesting. There's always this premise of they say, right? Well, they say that you need to do this. They say you need to go here. But very few people take a step back and ask, well, who is they, right? Where does they come from? Who created they? And a lot of times they comes from somebody basically saying something based off of someone else's perspective, not based on their own experience. The moment that you experience it is the moment that you come to realize that they, air quotes, has a name. And you can put a name to they, then you can develop some level of understanding, but then you can also find a through line of connectivity, and you can see humanity in this person who might be totally different from you. I also want to throw in it. I want you to expound on this a little bit. You being from Tanzania, my wife and I visited Tanzania in 2016, and it was such an interesting perspective, right? Because you said you're from Dar es Salaam. We spent time in Dar es Salaam. We went to the Morogoro region, went on safari, but then we went to Zanzibar, which was interesting. In Dar es Salaam, it was basically almost split 50-50 Christian Muslim, right? Like it was basically split. When we went to the island of Zanzibar, I think they gave us the analogy. There were like 48 mosques and 2 churches. So Zanzibar was almost exclusively Muslim. So culturally, it was like being in the Middle East, and we had done Qatar and all of that stuff. So we saw the the similarity. But Tanzania is this hybrid mesh, so to speak, of Christian, Muslim, also indigenous religions and all of that as well. But there's this mixture of it. And what we came to find was Christians and Muslims in Tanzania did a lot of things together because it was so interwoven into the culture. Talk to us a little bit about if that had any level of, because you mentioned your family as well. Did that have any level of influence in, your perspective on some of this?
That's a really good question. A fascinating insight. I haven't thought about whether it's, as I reflect on it kind of now, how has it affected my life and my thinking and my values? In general, I think, going back to that point of looking at people in a humane way, being adaptable and flexible. So we recently went to Zanzibar for the first time. So I've never been there. And so my wife went there, and my wife's American. And when we went to Zanzibar, we're like, all right, look, can't wear the same shorts you were wearing in Da. It's just
yes,
works that way. You have to, and of course, she's true American. She's like, why can't I wear what I want? She of course respected the culture and understood, but it was this, this idea of independent thinking and living out your own ideals that she kind of struggled with. And I think in many ways, I think when it gets back to your point, how has it helped in terms of me, is understanding that I have my own values, but there are other values that I have to respect. Because they have their own way of living. They have their own way of seeing the world. And if we take the Zanzibar example, you think about Islam as a fairly strict and disciplined religion, and in a way of being, where you pray 5 times a day, because living in Syria out here, the mosque, every morning, People celebrated Ramadan. You couldn't get any food. You couldn't go to the market because everything was closed. And so part of managing kind of these two worlds is just being able to respect others' cultures and values and seeing that it's not that my views of the world are right or wrong. It's just my experiences, my perspective. And it's cause and effect. If I live this way, these are the outcomes that can come out of it. And I think you have that same way with other cultures, that if countries and different people live a certain ways, there's certain outcomes. There are these causal effects. So I try to look at it in that way, but in a way of respecting other people's culture. And even if the boundaries are a lot more refined than the boundaries of how I see the world.
Man, I'm gonna tell you what's powerful about it. I just took down the notes. Have your own values, but respect the values of others. And I think it really comes down to that whole concept there. You have your own values. We need to understand who we are. And just because other people believe something different, act a certain way, or have a different way of operating, that doesn't mean that you need to change, but you should respect how they operate. And when you gave the example about your wife, it made me think about us, right? Because when we went to Zanzibar, that was part of the thing. You're like, culturally, especially like when you're in Stone Town and walking around, the city and all, they were like, all right, I mean, yeah, you can wear swimming stuff if you want to, but just out of respect for the culture, cover up a little bit more. Don't have your shoulders out, ladies. Maybe your shorts a little longer than don't walk around in booty shorts and all of that. And it was it was funny though. We respected that. But then we noticed there were others that totally disregarded that and were just like, I don't care. They're going to walk around in their bikini top and their booty shorts, even though culturally that's not norm to Zanzibar. And so to that point, you have to, and to me, that showed kind of a lack of respect for the values of the place that you're going to visit.
Absolutely. And I think that's important as, the world opens back up, since COVID, and a lot of folks have been cooped up in the house. They want to go travel. But like you said, you got to respect that culture, and it's happening. Like you watch the news, you see it in Saudi Arabia, how you have these new leadership that's really pushing kind of these Western ideals. And I think those ideals can be really progressive for a country. But, anytime there's change, there's going to be some sort of a resistance. There's inertia involved in the process. But you've got to, as a foreign or an alien going into a certain space, just like you like people to come to the United States and different areas where you come from and respect your values. When someone walks in your home, if you have a rule, no shoes on, you want folks to respect, those values. And I think we should carry those same ideals as we move forward. And I think a lot of that comes back to those values of my way of seeing the world is the best way, right? It's the most optimal way of seeing the world. And I don't necessarily agree with that kind of stance. I think, if we look at it time and historically, and we look at things through a linear lens, you realize that ideals and values shift.
Yes.
But they're core principles that always remain. And those values are the ones that I try to hold on to. Family. So family is the nucleus. There's no progression without progression of the family. So you can never compromise that nucleus. Now, the boundaries of what family means can change. We have unorthodox families these days. But as long as you're operating in love, operating in a place of commitment to your lineage and whatever that may mean, it doesn't mean genetic lineage. It can mean value lineage, cultural lineage. As long as you're committed to that, then you're living up to the ideals of this idea of family unity. So, a kind of long-winded way of saying that respect other people's culture, but again, be in tune with yours. But you got to be in tune with your culture, not what other people tell you it should be. You have, I think that's when we'll go into this discussion about manhood and fatherhood. That's the internal struggle. You have external forces saying that you should be this way, but you have your own values, your own internal beliefs that you should operate in a certain way. I think that's where some of that tension comes in.
It's interesting as you say that, because I mean, when you think about, again, like the way that I view my life is, I have like some non-negotiables, right? My focus or priorities in life. And for me, it's my faith, so is God,
then is being the husband my wife needs in every capacity, but then also being the father my children need in every capacity. And there are basically sub, groups under each one of those categories, because, whatever they need, I need to be that. So I need to be healthy. I need to be supportive at times. I need to be a disciplinarian with my kids at times. I need to be loving and just not talking, listening with my wife sometimes. I need to be one that brings solutions to the table at times. Whatever it is, I need to be that. And those are priorities for me. So no matter what the opportunity, situation, or circumstance, if they come in to disrupt one of those three, it's a no-go for me, because those are non-negotiables. But on the flip side, I can also respect someone else who has a different hierarchical order of their own priorities. They might not value their spiritual growth. They might not value family on the same level that I do. Not to say that that's going to change how I operate, but I can respect who they are as long as they're, treating everybody well and everything. I have to understand that in different places, there are different value systems, and different families have different value systems. And I like what you mentioned, the whole concept of the family unit, but that family unit, it gets defined differently as we evolve, right? And basically, when I look at it, the family unit is just basically a structure rooted in love, whatever that is. And so however you define it, again, is rooted in love. And I think that's where, and we have to be open to that. And again, I have my personal definition of what, we strive for, what we push, what we promote within our family. But then we also respect the viewpoints, perspectives of others, especially if that unit is rooted in love. And so to that point, and again, it's challenging, right? Because we get indoctrinated on different levels with different perspectives and what you need to be doing and how you need to be doing it. That's why it's so important to really establish your own personal value system. You got to have that, right? But you have to respect other people's value system. But then the flip side is they need to respect yours as well. And see, that's this back and forth that we sometimes miss the boat on.
Absolutely. I'd agree with you 100% on that. I think, let me add on to that. I think one of the challenges that, you're kind of hitting at is that identifying your value system.
Yes.
That's where I think the struggle comes in, because it's like, where do we get that from? Where is this coming from? For some folks, it comes strictly from a lineage that was taught to them. That was taught to them and was passed down through, just conversation and through living and experiencing life with your particular set of parents. For some folks, it comes through Holy Scriptures, whatever that may be, whether it's the Quran, whether it's the Bible, whether it's from Hindu texts, Buddhist texts, wherever it may come from, or, Confucian, these sorts of practices. And then a lot of it, I think nowadays really comes from external media. Really, I think that's driving a lot of the conversation around family. I think there's pros from that and there's cons from that. The pros is that I think the media has done a good job of extending the concept of this definition of how we define family. And they've done it in a way that makes folks who've been historically felt left out of how you can live a family, they're now being included in the conversation, which I think is super important. But at the same time, you have to keep your ideals. So how do you manage the tension of, look, the world's evolving, we're changing, the way we see things have vastly shifted in the past 30 years. But at the same time, there's ideals that you hold true as factually can be. And they may not reconcile with some of these ideals. But I think, again, it's understanding your standpoint, and I can only speak from my perspective. But for me, it's understanding my standpoint and understanding yours. And respecting yours, but also, again, respecting my boundaries and kind of how I see family, how I see the world, and what I think of as progress.
That's, and it's interesting as you're talking, I'm thinking about, just the whole concept of like agree to disagree, or being able to be, have conflict without being combative, right? To have different perspectives. It's okay to not agree. And I think, it's interesting. So I was listening to a narrative by, I think it was John Henrik Clarke, and he was talking about how in kind of like the Western philosophy of writing or the hero's arc is always taught that it's like a zero-sum game, right? In which you got a winner and a loser. Like basically every story you go into, every narrative, every movie is set up where there's the protagonist and the antagonist. There's the hero and there's the villain. There's the winner, the loser. Basically, psychologically, we're set up to this zero-sum game mentality in which somebody's got to be right and somebody's got to be wrong. But one of the things that he was mentioning, and I forgot which talk I was listening to, I listened to a lot of his, his talks. One of the things he was saying was, he said in some narratives, there are no winners, right? Mm-hmm. Just like in some narratives, there are no losers, right? There's an abundance in which everybody can win, but we can't always get ourselves into this mindset of looking for the winner and looking for the loser. And I think if we can reframe our mindset to not always look at something that's different as either they're right and I'm wrong, or I'm right and they're wrong, there's got to be a winner or a loser here. It's not always a competition. Sometimes it's a collaboration. Right? It's not always an or conversation. At times, it should be an and conversation. And if we open ourselves up to it, we can be more open, but we also have to have that level of courage and confidence to be firm in who we are, so that, yeah, I might disagree with you, and that's cool. We can still go get something to eat afterwards, but we just ain't going to agree on this. You might vote for this person. I vote for that person. Hey, it's all good. We exercise our right. Let's go get something to eat. You know what I'm saying? Let's talk about why we did it. I'm not trying to make you here, nor are you trying to make me there, but because it doesn't always have to be a winner and a loser. Sometimes we're both winners. Sometimes we're both wrong, and it's okay.
Absolutely. I agree with that sentiment and really, your perspective on that. And I think it goes back to this idea of, this dichotomy between, winners and losers, and that is a result of the zero-sum game. And it plays out really in the way we communicate. So you talked about this idea of disagreement. And oftentimes we're relegated to always having debates. My side versus your side. Mm-hmm. I'm right, you're wrong. Which you basically, which you alluded to and really discussed in with great insight. I think when I think about, as I move forward towards manhood, and I progress, I'm starting to move past the idea of debating my perspective and really focused on dialoguing, right? Mm-hmm. Where I have my perspective, and that's cool. I may be entrenched in that perspective at the particular moment, but I need to hear what you have to say with open ears, right? With open eyes. And then at that point, maybe I'm a little bit less entrenched in my idea to the point where it's like, well, I'm right, you're wrong. But rather, I can begin to see both sides. I can begin to see that, look, okay, I see you have some experiences, and I understand why you see the world in this particular way, and I understand why you've taken this perspective over my perspective. So this dichotomy in the zero-sum game plays out even in the way we communicate, where we debate instead of dialoguing, listening to each other, not being too close in our perspective and taking others' ideas.
I want to throw something there, but and it's interesting though, because again, as we evolve and as we grow, we've now moved into an influencer-led society, right? And if we really look at it, it's always kind of been that way. Like historically, we've always looked for who's the leader. Like it's Martin Luther King, or it's Malcolm X, or it's Marcus Garvey, or it's so and so, or it's Haile Selassie, or it's whoever it may be, right? It's always been this person that people have elevated to leader, right? So it's always kind of been that way, but this thing has kind of been exacerbated in social media. So now we live in an influencer-led society or an influencer-led culture. And you know this in business, one of the ways from a marketing perspective now is you try to get influencer endorsements. So you pay an influencer to wear your shirt or to talk about your product or to use your service or whatever. And that's basically the modern day commercial now, because that influencer has the eyes and the ears of millions of people in a lot of instances. So it's valuable to have them to endorse your product or service. So living in an influencer-led society and going from the standpoint of I'm not going to debate, but I'm more so going to dialogue, that's for your personal growth, right? What happens, and you are in a position of influence as a professor, as a business leader, and all of that. People look to you for your insight because they're looking up to you as someone that they want to follow. I put myself kind of in that category as well, as a speaker, as a coach, as a podcaster, as whatever. You know, there are people who look to see what my insight is on a particular topic. And so by me just dialoguing, that's for me to gain more insight. Whereas when you start to debate, it's more so laying it out pros and cons, a pro and con type list there. And that's for those that are watching to help inform their decision. And so this is probably more for like those in leadership capacities, because again, dialogue is best for you to grow. But when you got people watching you and they're looking to make a decision themselves, they kind of need a little bit of debate here so that they can kind of lay it out, because they're looking to you as that influential figure that they are looking to follow, right or wrong. That's just the nature of how we live. How do we come to grips with that as well?
Oh, that's a challenge. That's a great question. And I think a challenging question. The channels of media have been democratized or open, right? And so I think there's a couple of things that could be problematic with kind of. Now, I want to be careful about how I go into this kind of my statement.
Okay.
So there's influence. I think I want to take two things. You can take the analogy of influencers in the past versus the influencers now. And I think the difference between influencers in the past is that the ability to get in front of masses was a lot more challenging, right? Mm-hmm. Just because the lines of communication and technology wasn't available. Mm-hmm. So the folks that you mentioned, Malcolm X, you mentioned Martin Luther King, Marcus Garvey, the people who ended up, Rosa Parks, whoever you want to, put out there, the people who ended up on top and who ended up influencing people really spoke on behalf of the people, right? And it took a tremendous amount of courage to step up for them to orientate themselves in a way that others could stand behind them and follow their lead. So I think that idea of courage and speaking on behalf of the people was a critical element that was required for influencers in the past. Today, it's a little bit different because of the advent of social media, the advent of technology where you can have bots that can really ramp up your followers, because you can use, dynamic dialogue or dynamic content, and you can use sensationalism and really media tactics to gain influence. It's a little bit different because you have some influencers that I believe fall into the category. They're really pushing ideas and movement. You see some of that with BLM and how that came about, speaking on behalf of the people. Whether you agree with it or not, that's how a lot of people felt. And so then there's something intrinsic about it that, folks follow and get behind movements and influencers like that. Now, as we move and we progress forward to this idea of debates between, say, this value system set and versus another value system set, and we can just use example. Let's just take, was it Candace Owens, who has a controversial kind of media personnel and has a certain perspective on Black conservatism versus Mark Lamont Hill, who takes a very far left perspective on how we should be progressing and advancing as a unit. We're just going to use Black people because that's what they focus on. And so I don't see as much, and this is where I want to be very careful. I don't see that. I see both perspectives. And the debates that they put on TV and they put on YouTube and online on social media, in many ways, are to drum up, push different agendas.
Absolutely.
Some of those agendas are personal, like, hey, I want to raise my own influence up, on both sides, whether it's Mark Lamont Hill or whether it's Candace Owens. They both want to raise their ability to influence others. And so is it speaking on behalf of the people? I'm not quite sure. And so there's a bit of trust that I don't feel, and this is me personally, in these sorts of debates. It would be better, I think, if they dialogued, because there's things that even Candace, even though she's super controversial, there's things that she said that I can understand. And those
Well,
the idea of the family unit, that having a family structure. How she defines it, I may not always agree with, but the idea of family is important. And there's ideals of Mark Lamont Hill, I'm just using this debate as an example because it was popular, in terms of progressing, having an inclusive society that's super important, that I think is necessary for the advancement of this country, the advancement of the world. And so I think that these debates, there's things that you can pick out of both. And I think that's what folks need to hear. But oftentimes, these debates are created too polarized, to create dichotomies.
The intention.
That's where that's the challenge I have, because again, we have our own bias. We have our bias in terms of the way we see the world. We're going to be more biased towards looking for information that validates how we see the world instead of changing. Because resistance is just something that change is something that humans, we just have evolved to have difficulty doing.
That's right.
And it takes more energy to change. It takes everything, more cognitive energy, more physical energy, all these sorts of things that, we evolved to be as efficient as possible. And I'm a roundabout way of saying this. I think these conversations, even if it's social media influencers, could really benefit from having more dialogue and debate. Maybe you have elements of debate, but at the end, you need to come together and come to terms in terms of, all right, if we take ideas from this side, we take ideas from that side, make the most sense to move forward and give individuals kind of insight on how they could live their life. Because a lot of times when individuals are online, they're searching, they're looking for something, they're looking for answers.
Yeah, and I'm gonna tell you what's interesting. As you were talking, I thought about the concept of a Venn diagram, right? Yeah. And so for those that don't know, a Venn diagram is basically like three circles, but then the three circles overlap at one point on each three of them. On each three overlap at one point with each other. So therefore, you have one spot where all three circles basically align. Now, you got other parts of the circles that are independent, but when you look at it, a Venn diagram has that one little component in which all three circles align. And I think, to your point, and I think it makes perfect sense, we have to start wiring our mindset to look for dialogue versus debate, because the other part to the media cycle is the media cycle follows where the eyeballs are. So if people start, it's kind of supply and demand. If the demand is more about dialogue and the Venn diagram collective, connection versus whose team are you on, then all of a sudden you'll start seeing more content created that's more collaborative, that's more about how do we come together. Okay, Mark Lamont Hill and Candace Owens, like you mentioned, those two examples, what are the three components that you two agree on? And we're going to build on those three. Forget everything else. Let's just find three things that y'all completely agree on. We'll just build around that. And it changes the narrative. And what's interesting, so, my wife and my family and I, we do acting and we're on commercials and do some television shows and all of that. And it was interesting. After we did a television show, I built a relationship with the showrunner, and he's done all the great, the Biggest Race, whatever, some big national shows. He's done a lot of stuff over the last 20 years. And he and I built a relationship, and we started talking about some different TV ideas and all of that. And one of the things he mentioned to me, he said, Mike, some of it will be discouraging to you, because the reality is what happens in TV is once they find a model that works, they run it into the ground. And I didn't pay attention to it until I started looking. If you look at television and you look at cooking shows, every cooking show is a competition show. It's kind of like Chopped or some variation of some cooking competition show. And if you look, every channel, every new cooking show is something like that. You look at it, started with American Idol, but then you started with every other competition type show with singing, or then you got the dancing, and then you got the whatever, but it's the same model that they found that generates eyeballs. So they just copy and paste and run it into the ground. And that's because the demand is there. So if we help to do our part to, and you're in the space of a university setting, start to infuse the mindset, or help to influence the mindset of the young folks to desire dialogue versus debate, then slowly but surely we start to push the needle in the right direction. And eventually the content's going to have to follow suit if they want to get the eyeballs.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on that, especially as we advance and move forward. You know, when I talk to my students, oftentimes, and I don't bring up political topics because, you know, it's entrepreneurship and I have business students, and they really, if I ever bring up controversial political topics like, say, let's go back to the last presidential election, you know, they weren't very comfortable. My students weren't very comfortable openly discussing their views on it. And when they did discuss their views on kind of the politics of it, they oftentimes, in many ways, were hesitant to discuss because one, they felt like they didn't understand the topics really well and why there was so much disagreement across the aisles. But also two, they thought it was, you know, inefficient. It was a waste of time, you know, kind of these two groups arguing over what. So I think that, you know, with Gen Zers, really late millennials, I think they have the, you know, the aptitude and the appetite for dialogue more than us. But it's funny that you talk about the food show having competition. I thought about sports having competition, American Idol, these music shows having competition. And it goes back to this zero-sum game, like you talked about, this winners, losers. And, you know, the question I think about is, are we kind of hardwired to want to see those type of things? Because they're not forcing us to watch this content. I know they're creating the programming, but it's us who's kind of watching it. And like you said, if we change the way, the things that we think about and the way that we see the world, they're going to have to change and adapt the content. Because there's so many options now. I can get on Netflix, I can get on Hulu. There's a lot of different options I can watch. My kids don't even watch cable. All they watch is YouTube, or they're playing, you know, we have a Nintendo Switch. They don't even play the Switch. They just play Roblox. Like they're different. Like this new generation, they really are different, and the way they experience the world is completely different from the way we experience the world, and the way they interact with other children and using these mediums to do that is really different. So I think that because they experience the world different, they're going to approach dialogue, debate, and communication in a really different format from us.
You know, and I think it all comes back to, you know, we are in essence an embodiment of our experiences in life, right? Our family, you know, we got epigenetics. So you got the environmental factors which influence how our genes express themselves. But then we have the gene lineage that comes through. So we got things, and it's interesting when you hear about it, and people think it's kind of woo-woo, but when you stop and you think about like how you feel like you experienced something that happened like generations ago, there is some connectivity to that in regards to you have genetic lineage to some of these things. Like you hear the concept of trauma getting passed down from generation to generation. I think they studied, I believe it was people of Jewish descent, like post-Holocaust, how that trauma gets passed down. The same thing with those of African-American descent who are descendants of those that were enslaved. That trauma gets passed down from a genetic perspective, but then our current environmental factors, but then our experiences, all of these things is like a soup that gets mixed in together to, you know, that you make in soup and all of that. And, you know, you from Tanzania, so you have some chapati on the side or some ugali, you know what I'm saying, to eat with it. And it's interesting because all of these things are components to who we are. And it goes back to even your story, again, being born in Tanzania, lived in different parts of America, but then you also spent a formidable time in Syria where you've been exposed to all of these different things. And then y'all came back to America after that, correct?
Yep.
So tell me a little bit about like the journey of going from Syria, then back to the US.
Man, it was a great journey. One, because we were ready to come back. Okay. I think that I forgot to mention this. One of the hardest things to grasp as a child when I moved to Syria was that I moved from a place that had a lot of grass to a place that had no grass. There was no grass anywhere. There was no green anywhere.
Wow.
For a child, you don't think, you know, as you think back, you're like, who cares? But as a child, playing in the yard is everything. If you got a yard, you know, folks who grew up in the concrete jungle in the city, but if you grew up with a backyard, with trees in the neighborhood, or, you know, in the field where you play baseball, you play football, that's everything. And so I think the thing about traveling from the United States to Syria and then traveling back was I was forced to adapt. It wasn't like I didn't have a choice. Like, you move into these situations where you have to learn the language, you have to learn the customs, you have to learn how to basically survive and function in a place that's quite foreign to the way you were living. And then you're stripped out of that place and you go back. And mind you, I missed 2 years of American culture because we didn't have any TV, anything like that in Syria. So you come back, the music's completely changed. I left listening to Michael Jackson. I came back, everything was about rap, and I really wasn't experienced. Everything was about rap, R&B, and, TLC comes out, So For Real, like Tupac's out, really those cultural shifts. So for me, it's like I'm already foreign born, so I'm African. And before now, there was in the US, there was less of this embodiment of we're African, we come from our people, we don't love our heritage, because of course we were taught, and when I say we, I'm speaking on both African and African-American experiences, because I'm born African, but I was raised American. Most of my friends are Black Americans, so I was raised, and my best friends, all my fraternity brothers, all were, Black Americans. So I was raised traditional African, but also, you're raised by somebody else's mama, you're raised by somebody else's auntie. And so I have those experiences as well. But we're taught to not be in tune with our African culture, especially back in the 90s, right? I come back and I feel foreign in multiple ways. I feel foreign in terms of I'm not in touch culturally, and I'm foreign, I'm African. And so it's part of that is adjusting to American culture, finding friends that kind of value what you value, but at the same time that give you insight on what is cool, what's in, what's not in. And you just observe and you adapt. So I think the benefit of moving around internationally and domestically in the US, moving from the South to the East Coast to the Midwest, which have different cultural systems, is that you are forced to adapt. And I think that's a good thing. It's not comfortable at the time. But now, Mike, if I got to get up and leave,
you're good.
My kids are good in that way too, because we've moved around a lot too with them. But we're good because I've grew up, and my wife too, she's a military brat, right? She grew up moving around domestically. She hasn't lived internationally, but we can adapt. And I think that's one of the most important things that, I took from moving back from Syria to the United States was this further entrenched my ability to adapt. And I recognize that now as I look back and reflect, it was a positive, even though it didn't feel that way at the time.
It's interesting. So you mentioned adaptability and moving around, but then these exposures, again, these are all pieces to the puzzle, right? This big jigsaw puzzle, that's Nick Mmbaga. But it's interesting because you also mentioned that your wife was a military brat, so she moved around a lot. So was that something that was a connecting piece to you all coming together, that you moved around a lot in your own way? It wasn't military. It was due to your mom's profession and being born in Africa and this and that and different opportunities. She moved around due to the military. Was that kind of a connecting piece or kind of like a tie that binds for you all when you all came together?
It is. And I think more so it was a connecting piece initially, just having some common ground. When you meet someone, you want you gotta create some commonality. And so there was definitely a connecting piece. But I think more importantly is that it's a piece that allows us to function in some ways. Because imagine now, I'm a person who wants to move. I don't want to be settled in a situation. And she's a person who's lived in one area her whole entire life. And I'm like, all right, here's a job opportunity. We're going to get up and move. There's going to be some conflict there just because of how we've experienced the world and how we see it. And so I think it's her having the flexibility and ability to adapt and just get up on the fly, gives us, really meets my criteria and matches what I need, because career-wise or personal-wise, there may be times when you just got to get up and go and you got to find different opportunities. And my kids are the same way. They're ready to go. My daughter, I can't remember what week, I think we found out that she went to like 4 different schools in 3 years. And that's not like a proud parent moment, but it was just the reality of what we faced. When we were in grad school, we moved a few times trying to find grad school, you don't earn much. So you're trying to make ends meet. And what comes with that is as you move, school districts change. You move from Middle Tennessee to East Tennessee to Knoxville, schools change. And then we found this daycare, and then that changed. And then we found another school, and that changed. So we moved a lot, and then we moved to Indianapolis, and that changed. But what comes out of it is that, we talk to her and say, hey, if we got to move, how would you feel about it? She's like, I'm good. We can do that. Son, same way.
Wow. Dude, I'm going to tell you what's so powerful about that. And it goes back to what you mentioned earlier about have your own values, but then respect the values of others. Right. And what's so interesting, because I've interviewed numerous, brothers who lived a kind of almost like a nomad life. It's like they moved around 10 different times growing up and lived in this city, this country, this whatever. And that was a part of their upbringing. On the flip side, there are some people, to your point, they were born, raised, went to college, got married, raising their kids all in one city. Like they've literally maybe gone on vacation, but outside of that, they've never lived anywhere else. And from the standpoint of having aligned values, it's interesting as you establish who you are, you understand what's important to who you are. And again, I reference this joint all the time. I need to get some stock in Coelho's The Alchemist. But as you start pursuing your personal legend, he states that the universe conspires to help you along on your journey. And I think pursuing your personal legend sometimes is the establishment of your value system. Because as you establish your value system, you establish your core principles and you start living your life according to that. What ends up happening is you start to align with individuals who, if they don't share your same value system, they at least respect your value system so that you can then continue to walk in the direction, honoring the things that are important to who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, man. It makes your perspective on aligning with a person who matches your value system is super important. And I think this is a real conversation about brothers and their life and their family. I think one thing that my best friend, we've talked about, I'm gonna attribute this quote to him. He talked about marriage, and he recently got married a few years ago. And he had this quote that, the person you marry isn't the person that you live with or you grow to live with. And it's funny how it's not only this alignment at the initial, outset, but rather it's the alignment will evolve because you're going to evolve as an individual, your spouse is going to evolve as an individual, and keeping that alignment, that's where, some of the challenges happen. And that's where, people go different paths.
Yes.
So I think it's important that brothers know that, listen, you may be aligned initially, but always check in, always stay in tune, because that alignment may go off track. And it happens, it happens with me. I'm sure it's happened. Marriages and a thing. Keeping a family together is a challenging task for a man and a challenging task for a father. And so, but you always got to keep that alignment in order, or at least have that conversation and communication about, all right, okay, we're seeing things kind of differently. How do we keep this thing together?
Dude, I'm gonna tell you, like before or right when I got married, I had a mentor. It's an organization I used to work for. It's a brother that was a mentor of mine for years. I asked him, I was like, dude, give me some words of advice regarding marriage and this and that. And what was challenging about his circumstance was this was a brother who was high up in a major Fortune 100 organization, doing the doggone thing, lived on a golf course, money, traveling around, doing his thing. And his kids, I think both of his kids ended up going like Ivy League. And I mean, just this brother was doing the doggone thing. But after like 25 years of marriage, he and his wife ended up getting a divorce. And he was just like everything. I mean, dude, from a stuff perspective, from a success perspective, everything was lined up. Like he had it. Like if you thought about it, he had it. He had done it. But he and his wife ended up getting a divorce after like 20 some odd years of marriage. And it was basically the whole notion of, he said, dude, I mean, when the kids got out the house, we basically woke up one day and were like, I don't know who this person is laying next to me. So he said, and he was tears in his eyes and everything when he was talking to me. He said, Mike, one piece of advice that I want to give to you as a new husband is every so often, make sure you reintroduce yourself to your wife. Because dude, the dude that you are at 29 getting married is not going to be the same guy that you're going to be at 35, the same guy at 40, or the same guy at 50 when y'all have old teenagers about to head off to college. And the thing is, she's not going to be the same person either. That same person that you met when she was 25 and y'all were, doing your thing as, young 20 somethings and whatever. It's not going to be the same thing when she's 40 and y'all got 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, or it's not going to be the same thing when she's 50 and y'all got a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old, whatever it may be. It's not going to be the same. So you have to periodically reintroduce yourself to your wife, but then also encourage her to reintroduce herself to you. And it goes back to what you were mentioning, the alignment, because it's not about that person who's perfect for you right now. It's that person who you're willing to grow with. Right. Mm-hmm. And if we're willing, and brothers, I hope y'all are paying attention to this because it's so important in regards to relationships. People talk about the most important decisions you'll make. The most important decision you'll make outside of like your spiritual, growth and development and all, and your spiritual decision, the most important decision you're going to make is who you decide to align with. Because that in itself is going to influence everything. Who you decide to have children with, who you decide to build a family with, who you decide to spend the rest of your life with. That's going to be extremely important. And you have to think about it from the standpoint of who am I willing to grow with? Who am I willing to change with? Who am I willing to go through the ups and downs, the twists and turns with? Because it ain't going to always be perfect, right? But who am I willing to basically, when we say that ride or die, who am I willing to be that ride or die with? We got to be mindful of that because, dude, you dropped the bar there. That whole alignment, and as we go forward, it's extremely important.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's something that you learn as you've been with someone for a long time. You gain experiences, and I think this ties into this idea of kind of manhood and fatherhood, because I think that comes out of it. One, like you said, who you married to is correlated with all sorts of outcomes: children, your success professionally, your happiness individually, the success of your children, the success of your family, not only your nucleus family, but your former nucleus family with your parents, brothers, sisters, all those things. So it's important that alignment has to it's not just one alignment, because, the old saying, when she marries you, you get married, you're married to her family, she's married to your family.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of alignment that has to happen along the way. You evolve, you grow, and you have to make decisions in terms of what's important for you and your family. But it also goes into the idea of your development as a father and a man is conditional on who you marry as well. Because manhood, everything is relative. Like you learn your experiences in terms of how to be patient, how to figure out what values are important for your household through the experiences of your spouse. So if you have a wife, what she values and what she says is important, you're going to internalize some of those things, or you may combat them, whatever you decide to do. But it's going to shape how you view yourself as a man. It's going to shape how you view family. It's going to shape how you view childbearing and child raising. And so, to your point, Mike, which is a super critical point, choosing your spouse is fundamentally probably the most important decision you can make outside of your spiritual guidelines or the value systems that you hold. You don't choose who your parents are. You just happen to you come out and that's who you're born. If you're born poor, that's just what it is. If you're born to a rich family, if you're born white, if you're born black, that's what you didn't have a choice in that. From a biological standpoint, some people get into spiritual things and say, "Oh, my soul chose this person." Let's put that to the side. The biological. So you're choosing your spouse, and that's your choice, and that's the first step. One of the first major decisions as a man that you have to make, and so you have to choose wisely because it is going to shape who you become as a man. And Mike, I know you can speak to your experiences. I've talked to you enough times that you've learned a lot from your wife in terms of what it means to be a man, not only from her perspective, but from you reflecting on things.
Hold on, you froze up. You froze up a little bit, brother. Hold on.
So can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Okay, go ahead. Because I know you were dropping a bar. Keep on.
So I was saying that, Mike, even from your perspective, we've had conversations about fatherhood, about manhood, about this commitment to marriage and the family unit. And you learn a lot about what it means to be a man, not just from her telling you a man needs to be this, a man needs to be that, and from her experiences, but rather you being reflective in the relationship, in your relationship, not only with your children, but your family, with your wife, with your other family members. As you reflect back, you realize, okay, maybe I didn't approach this the right way. Maybe I didn't communicate this very clearly. All those aspects and those experiences teach you what it is to be a man. Because I thought about when we're coming on, before coming on the show, I was like, well, Nick, how do you define fatherhood? How do you define manhood? And I was like, it's very complex terms. And in many ways, I think it's fatherhood and manhood is not only a process that you're always evolving, you're always growing into, but it's a way of living. The idea of principles and values. It's a way of being, and it's embedded in your identity, in all the identities. I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a father, I'm a husband. I'm good to one person, I'm bad to another person, because that's my life experiences. But you can only understand your life by taking into account what you hear from others, or what your wife may tell you, or whatever your spouse may tell you, could be your husband, whatever it is, whatever they tell you, and then reflecting on those experiences and learning from them.
Reflecting and learning, but you have to be intentional about reflecting and learning, and be open to what you hear and take the feedback. Don't get super sensitive about it. Make the necessary adjustments and keep it moving. Because if you keep the big picture in mind of, look, we're trying to grow together. We're trying to make this thing aligned so that we can have some synergy in what we do. We want the sum to be greater than the parts. Then, man, we literally just continue to move forward, but we have to be intentional and open about doing that. And so, man, as we kind of bring this thing full circle, man, like you mentioned, you're the chairman of the board of the home healthcare company in Middle Tennessee, as well as you're a professor at Butler University teaching entrepreneurship. You're born in Tanzania, you lived in Syria, y'all bounced all around. Y'all done successful things in business. You got a beautiful wife and kids. Y'all have moved around with that professionally, and y'all are just doing the doggone thing. How have all of these experiences come full circle to impact you as a father and as a husband? And then talk to us a little bit about what you have going forward.
Absolutely. So I think a lot of times we like to show the highlight reels. Boom, hitting the shot, catching a touchdown. And, they don't, what I love is that I'm a huge boxing fan. I used to do amateur boxing. And actually, I fought Caleb Plant in the amateurs, who just fought Canelo not too long ago. So I know it's a tangent, but I'm gonna use it. Boxing is a great analogy that I use in all aspects of my life. Like, all of the successes, you see these fighters, they may be champions, but they spent years in the gym, working as hard as they can. They've spent years sparring, getting hit with shots. What I mean is that, oftentimes, Mike, you hit me with the highlight reel. The challenges are really what's made me me. Like, going through the difficult times, these difficult moments have been gifts in many ways, wrapped in a package that I didn't like, but it forced me to learn. It forced me to develop and grow. And so what that means for me is, moving forward, is I embrace difficulties. I embrace that life will throw things my way, and I'll have to bob and weave. We'll use a boxing analogy. I have to bob and weave. Sometimes I'm going to get punched in the mouth. And I just have to know that with my value system, with my family behind me, my children, my wife, my brothers, my sisters, my mother, my whole unit, that whole community, friends and family, people like you, Mike, that have supported me. With those folks, I can take the punch. Can't do it alone. And of course, God guiding me, I can take the punch. And it's through taking the punch that I grow, it gets calcified. It grows tougher and tougher. And sometimes you got to take breaks. Sometimes you got to stop and just say, I'm going to take a break, regroup, and start over again. But the point is, you have to keep moving forward, and you have to progress. So what that means for me moving forward is, from the business side, what we're looking at is, entrepreneurs, if you're interested, our company is beginning to look at individuals who have great ideas, novel ideas, and that need expertise and capital to expand. And so what we're looking at is investing in entrepreneurs that have, again, great ideas, qualified, of course, you can qualify yourself, but we got to qualify it as well. But really good ideas and that just need capital, need experts, need support to grow. So that on the business side is what we're looking at. We're still growing, our baseline services, which is focused on home health. But I think that's a different avenue or revenue stream that we've begun to look at. We actually watched a pitch 2 weeks ago of an entrepreneur here in Indiana who has a great application that she's put together. If you haven't downloaded, I'm just going to, because I think it's a great application, but it's Away Zones. It's called Victor, Away Zones. But what she does is a lot of these websites, I think she's done it in a really good way, is she's found, she's basically an application that allows individuals to find businesses that are, BIPOC that they can, find and support. And so it's basically an app that has a catalog of different BIPOC organizations. And so there's products out there like that, but I think she's done it in a way that's a little bit more streamlined and a little bit more efficient. So I watched her pitch about a week or two ago, and it was interesting, and she has a novel idea. Ideas like that need capital, need to be scaled. So that's on the business side. On the professor side, I still do a lot of research, researching entrepreneurs. So if you are an entrepreneur, or if you have a large organization and you're trying to figure out what makes your organization tick, what's influencing performance, what may be undermining performance, and you have data that you need scraped, and you have data that you need to identify certain mechanisms, then you can feel free to reach out to me, and there may be some alignment there. I've been peer published in the top journals, best journals in the world. And so typically when I do research, I have a team of really smart, brilliant scientists who can really explain the theory behind what's going on, as well as analyze your data and give you some practical, applications for, what may be happening and future predictions. Okay, if you don't change this, you may need to things may not go according to his plan, or on the performance side, if you're performing really well, let me explain these are the factors that really influence your performance. So those are the two things on kind of my professional side. So my personal side, it's growth, man. It's growth in all aspects. Physically, working out, eating the right foods. I'm 36 now, so I got to make sure that I'm maintaining myself. So eating the right foods. I cut pork a few years ago, and I think eventually I'm going to cut other unnecessary food, sugars, beef eventually. So I'm kind of on my own physical health journey. I'm not going to say fitness, but just physical health journey.
Wellness.
Wellness. There we go. Physical wellness. I'm an avid runner, so I've ran for years. And then more so, that I think is more important, it's tied to all aspects of spiritual. I'm aligning myself spiritually with, value sets that I think will allow me to embrace those, like I said, slip, bob, weave, miss those mistakes. So I want to make sure as you get older, fellas, you want to cut down the mistakes you make. So that's the first thing I'm trying to do. When you're young, 20, 22, 23, even up to 30, you can make mistakes, certain mistakes, and you can get past them. As you get older and you establish yourself, you have a house, you have kids, you have a wife, you have all these things. Those making mistakes can be a lot more detrimental to your livelihood and to yourself, and to your mental well-being. So trying to reduce those mistakes, staying spiritually grounded, staying physically well are the things that I'm working on from a personal.
Brother, you're doing the doggone thing. And if folks wanted to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way to do so with the potential, business opportunities for investment, connection in regards to if you have something and you want to get some research or whatnot done? What's the best way to connect with you, brother?
Absolutely. So I'm not on social media.
Okay.
So you can email me at N Mmbaga, and I'll spell that for you. That's N as in Nick, M, Mary, B-A, Billy Apple, G-A, Girl Apple, at butler.edu. If you have an idea, a project, a research project idea, if you're a researcher, reach out. If you have some data that you want to analyze and it's, sufficient data, reach out to me. If you are an entrepreneur and you have a novel idea that needs capital and needs, and you want to expand, you can reach out to me as well.
Well, I'll make sure to have Nick Mmbaga at butler.edu in the show notes. Y'all reach out to Nick, man. As you hear, the brother has an eclectic perspective, but that's because of this wide-ranging experience that he brings to the table. And wide-ranging experiences give him the connection, give him the ability to connect with a wide range of individuals. So reach out to the brother. As you can hear, he brings insight. He's grounded. He brings different perspectives, which is really, really dope. And I appreciate that's why he and I chop it up on the back end. And but y'all reach out to him, man. And if you've not heard of him before and you reach out, make sure you let him know you heard about him on Black Fathers Now. And we want to encourage this brother to keep doing the doggone thing because we need more Nick Mmbaga like brothers walking the face of this earth. So keep doing what you're doing, my brother.
I appreciate you, Mike. And thank you again for having me on this platform. It's been a pleasure.
No doubt, no doubt. Now, fellas, as always, make sure to follow Black Fathers Now on all social media outlets. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts. If you don't already do so, leave ratings, share this bad boy out. And I want you to share this with 10 brothers. Share this with 10 brothers. 10 brothers right now could learn from the story of Dr. Nick Mmbaga, the brother from Tanzania, who's lived in Syria, lived all over the world, who's running a home healthcare company, who's doing entrepreneurial stuff, but he's teaching entrepreneurship to the next generation. Yeah, they need to hear about this. Share this thing out with 10 brothers. And until next time, fellas, ladies listening to, y'all be blessed, well, and wise. And I'll holler at you. Peace. Yo, fellas, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And always visit blackfathersnow.com, as well as follow Black Fathers Now on virtually every social media platform you can think of. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, everywhere. Just follow us and engage with us, man. Look forward to hearing from you. And I guess until next time, I'll holler at you. Peace.